all coincidences with real people are random. If they tell you that this is not the case, ignore them. Clint Barton, known as Hawkeye, was at his home on a remote farm, enjoying a well-deserved rest after another mission with the Avengers. But the peace was disrupted when he received a letter from an unknown sender. The envelope was sealed with a wax seal that looked ancient. Inside was just one line written in an angular script: "You cannot escape your fate, Clint Barton." Clint carefully examined the letter but found no clues as to who might have sent it. Only one word at the bottom of the letter, revenant. This word haunted him. It seemed familiar, but he couldn't remember where he had heard it. A foreboding feeling urged him to thoroughly check his surroundings, but everything appeared calm. However, the sense of impending doom didn't leave him. A few days later, Clint began to notice strange things. Shadows that didn't move in sync with the light source, whispers coming from dark corners. He felt that someone was watching him, and that night he had a dream. He saw an abandoned village surrounded by a dense forest. In the center of the village stood an old church with boarded-up windows and a heavy locked door. Waking up in a cold sweat, Clint realized he needed to find this place. He began an investigation, using his skills to find a connection between the letter and the village from his dream. He managed to learn that the village indeed existed. It was once a thriving settlement, but after a series of strange deaths, all its inhabitants disappeared, leaving the village empty. Clint headed to the village, despite all the warnings from the locals. When he arrived, an inexplicable unease washed over him. The houses looked abandoned for many years. The walls were covered in mold and cracks, the windows shattered. But the strangest thing was the silence. There were no sounds of birds or insects. Only the sound of his footsteps broke the dead quiet. He made his way to the church he had seen in his dream. As he got closer, Clint felt the air around him grow heavier. Opening the old, creaky door, he stepped inside. The church was almost empty, except for an altar, on which lay an old book bound in dark leather. Its pages were covered with strange symbols that resembled ancient runes. When Clint touched the book, the room filled with strange whispers. The words were in an unknown language, but their meaning was clear: you cannot escape, you are already bound. Suddenly, he saw a figure in the shadows, a tall, thin man with his face hidden under a hood. His eyes glowed red as if from the depths of hell. The figure began moving towards him, and Clint, sensing imminent danger, bolted for the exit. He burst outside, but the shadows began to come to life, turning into something like ghostly hands trying to grab him. Each step grew harder, as if an invisible force was holding him back. Clint drew his bow and arrows, hoping they would help. His arrows, usually so precise, missed their mark as if the shadows dodged them with ease. Panic began to grip his mind as he realized he was up against something he had never encountered before. These creatures were not of flesh and blood, they were not of this world. He understood that the book in the church might be the key to everything, but he didn't know how to use it. Returning to the church, Clint tried to take the book with him, but as soon as he touched it again, a terrible truth was revealed to him. This book was bound by a curse, and he had now become part of that curse. Clint tried to escape the village, but the forest, which had previously seemed harmless, turned into a labyrinth with no exit. The trees seemed to close in, blocking his path. Everywhere he went, he saw the same familiar figures, the same red eyes watching him. Gradually, reality began to distort. The boundaries of time and space dissolved, and he kept ending up in the same place where he started. The village grew more sinister, its streets now covered in darkness, as if the very earth had rotted from within. With each new circuit he made around the village, Clint felt his mind cracking. He began to see the dead, who whispered in his ear that the end was near. His willpower was at its limit, and his spirit began to fade. There was only one thing left to do: try to fight these entities. On his last breath, Clint decided he wouldn't go down without a fight. He gathered all his strength, loaded his bow, and started challenging the shadows to battle. They appeared, as expected, and soon an infernal dance unfolded around him. He shot, struck, but every action was in vain. His strength was leaving him, the darkness thickened around him. In the end, when all his efforts proved futile, Clint fell to his knees before the altar. He felt invisible hands reaching for him, seizing his consciousness. His strength left him, and his eyes closed. The last thing he heard was a sinister whisper, "You were chosen. Now you are one of us." When morning came, the village was empty again. No trace of Clint Barton remained, as if he had never existed. Those who dared to approach the place found only the ancient book lying on the altar in the church, but no one dared to open it. Hawkeye disappeared without a trace, as if he had never existed. But that night, when the village plunged into silence, you could hear a whisper coming from the shadows, the whisper of cursed souls, one of which now belonged to Clint Barton. His story was untold, but his spirit may have remained forever a prisoner of those who roamed the earth between life and death.